Hey guys, what is up? Super K-Man Rocks here, and I am here for my LPL Finals overview and analysis video. It is time. I know it's been about a week since I posted last because the LPL semifinals were a little while ago, and we had to wait an entire week in order to get these, but I do hope you guys enjoyed your break. I spent the entirety of it watching minor region playoffs so that I could get ready for MSI, but it's time to jump back in to the LPL for one final series. We will know by the end of this episode who is going to be our 2024 LPL Spring Split Champions and who will be going to MSI as the #1 seed from the LPL, which is a pretty good distinction to have. It's certainly nice to be in the main stage and not have to go through play-ins, but I hope you guys are excited. I know I am. Let me know if you are excited. Let me know what you thought was going to happen in this series down in the comment section below. Did it go according to plan, or were you a bit surprised by the outcome? Always interested to hear you guys' thoughts and opinions on everything down there. Of course, if you want to know my thoughts on everything that's happened in the LPL playoffs, including the semifinals, you can check out the playlist up in the iCard as well as the semifinals video up in the iCard. Both of those things are going to obviously go over everything that have happened in the LPL, that has happened in the LPL up until this point, this series, this do or die finals. You can watch the semifinals for a breakdown of how I think these two teams match up against each other, and of course we covered every single week of the regular season and every single round of the playoffs on this channel as well. So check that out if you're interested. But today we are going to be going over the finals. There's nothing else to talk about, nothing else to go over. It's exclusively going to be the final series that we end up talking about. Of course, if you are new here, what we do is go game by game, talking about the advantages and the disadvantages that each team is able to generate. I'll be giving a player of the game and a dud of the game for each individual game. And at the end of the series, of course, I will also be giving a finals MVP. Like I said, nothing else to talk about, nothing else to preview. There will be MSI content coming out later. We'll quickly talk about maybe the play-in bracket that got drawn after the finals here, but for the most part, this episode is going to be entirely about the LPL finals, so I'm excited. Let's jump right into it. I've done enough pandering at the beginning of this video. Of course, it is a matchup between the #1 seeded Bilibili Gaming and the #2 seeded Top Esports, and I really am excited to see these two teams here because neither of them have been perennial powerhouses in the LPL. Of course, Top Esports having won a title, I believe in 2020, was the last time they had won, but Bilibili never champions of the LPL, and so you've got two teams here that, while they have had success in the past, of course, both of them being relevant last year, Top Esports making Worlds many times, and Bilibili, of course, being a team that very narrowly won the LPL last year, neither have actually been that consistent at hoisting the trophy, so there is going to be someone new at the top of the LPL standings. It's not going to be RNG or JD Gaming or one of these other teams, Edward Gaming, that have consistently been there. So how do these two teams stack up against each other? Well, quickly, I'll go over it. Of course, we already did preview that in the previous video, but we'll quickly talk about it here. Summing it up overall, I think that these teams are actually pretty evenly matched in terms of talent level. I think top, jungle, and bot lane are all relative pushes in terms of where I would give the advantage to. Maybe you could say that 369 is better than Bin, but if you say that, I think it's by a very small margin. I think Bin still has the upside to absolutely demolish any game. I think June and Tion are both very good. Maybe June has a slight edge there for Bilibili, and I think you could say the same thing for bot lane, where Elkanon have probably been the best bot lane in the world so far in 2024. Jackie Love and Mako, though, probably the second best bot lane in the world in terms of the performances that have been put out. And so I don't think any of those lanes are particularly different. I don't think that there are giant gaps in terms of the talent level between these two teams. Where I think you are looking for an advantage is perhaps in the mid lane, where Knight theoretically should be a pretty big upgrade over Cream, where he should be somebody that can take advantage of that matchup. But as we saw the last time these two teams played against each other, Knight has not necessarily been this dynamic carry throughout the playoffs for this team. It's actually something I've really praised Bilibili for. Knight has really adapted this more shove and roam, facilitate his jungle type of role, and I think it's helped BLG out a lot. It's a big reason why I think Elkanon have become the best bot lane in the world, is because they have a mid laner like Knight, who can not only dominate his own lane individually 1v1, basically no matter what the champions are, no matter what the matchup he gets is, but he's also more than willing to give up his own resources in order to help them. So I think Bilibili is going to be favored, especially because they did beat Top Esports the last time these two teams played, but TES made that series close. And again, 369, Jackie Love, Mako, these are some of the best performing players in the world at the current moment. You can't really count them out. Tion and Cream have a lot to prove, and I think that there is an opportunity for them to just not be as good as their opposition in this one, but I'm not going to sit here and say that that's impossible. They were actually really good in that previous series against Bilibili, and so I'm excited. I hope this series is as close as it was the last time these two teams played, but of course, going game by game means we get to start with game #1, and the winner of game #1 was Bilibili Gaming. They are going to take the first game of this series, and if you follow the channel for a long time, you know how important it is, in my opinion, to go up 1-0 in a series like this to generate that momentum, that edge in this series. Having to, win a lot of, 3 of the 4 final games is not easy, especially against a team like BLG or against TES, and so winning this game 1 does set you up a lot better, in my opinion. Depending on how the series goes, I consider it the most important game of the entire series, and I think BLG really did play excellent. I think they drafted something that was very traditional, very standard for what we've seen work at the LPL level so far throughout the playoffs. It's something I've talked about a lot. A lot of the picks I've been really pounding the table for on Bilibili's side, most notably that Maokai plus Talia mid-jungle duo. It's been very successful. Maybe not these two in particular as a duo, but separately they've both been very successful. But the bot lane really was what stood out to me. For top esports, I think they just indexed a little bit too heavily into the late game here, and they really gave up too much pressure in the mid game. Now, they had a chance to win this game. It certainly wasn't a complete blowout. The 43-minute, back and forth, they did a good job of actually being able to corral objectives. They were able to get that Dragon Soul, which I think really helped them. However, they just couldn't win the fights that actually mattered, and I think a lot of that was just BLG being a little bit better. So we'll talk about that. Player of the game is going to go to Elk. It's really hard to make the kind of impact that he had on Lucian in the late game, but when you're Elk and currently probably the best AD carry in the world, I'm willing to go out on that limb. I'm not sure if that's a hot take or anything, but Elk is probably currently the best AD carry in the world. You can probably do whatever you want, and the Lucian Nami was super effective in this game at being able to zone out really top esports from trying to commit to a lot of these fights. We talk about Jackie Love's Senna a lot on this channel as something that is able to kind of move in and out of being really aggressive, positioning really far forward, while also, at the same time maintaining a lot of survivability because of the natural advantages of Senna and also Tahm Kench being paired with it. But that's going to come with a bit of a price. If you get caught out early on in these fights, Elk is going to have a really, really, big advantage, and he's going to be able to take over a lot of these situations, and that's what we saw towards the end of this game. You do got to give a lot of credit to On as well on the Nami. You don't have a successful performance like this on Lucian if the Nami isn't also stepping up and being aggressive with you. You always talk about Nami positioning, but it really is a little bit different watching a good Nami and an average Nami, kind of against each other. On was really accurate with a lot of those bubbles, but most notably his positioning was excellent on a lot of the ultimates to end up really propelling his team forward. Obviously, it's not the most difficult bot lane duo to execute in the world, but Elkanon, I think, definitely showed some of their superiority in this one. Knight was also excellent in this game on Talia. I continue to say that Talia is, in my opinion, by far the best mid laner in the game right now. That's going to carry into MSI as well, and so Knight kind of picking up Talia and really kind of playing her a lot more than he had in previous years, I think is honestly a really good sign for what this team is going to look like moving forward. I think Knight has obviously progressed a lot more into being somebody that can be quote-unquote weak side, more of that shove and roam kind of supportive mid, taking that Yagao role that this team had last year and just doing it better because he can win lane isolated because of his mechanics. And I thought he was excellent in this game, was certainly better than Cream in the back half. Jun was good on the Maokai. I think he could have been a little bit more clinical in terms of controlling objectives, and similarly for Bim, I think he was a little bit too far forward in a couple of instances, and it actually hurt Lucian, I think, in a couple of specific circumstances, but for the most part, BLG was excellent, and I'm not going to say flawless, but pretty darn close in this game. And then for TES, they relied so much on this idea that their comp scales, because you've got Viego, you've got Azir, you've got Senna, you've got this really strong late game comp that should be able to win any fight, and so they really take their foot off the gas in the early game. They allow BLG to get a lot of the things that they want to get, and then they start fighting around 20-25 minutes, and they are actually able to generate some leads. Tian gets some resets on the Viego. Mako's looking really, oppressive on the Tahm Kench, especially with Jackie Love on the Senna, keeping him alive. They just didn't have the firepower, and they quite frankly got outplayed in some of these late game team fights, which caused them to really be in a bad position. Dead of the game for me is going to go to Cream in the mid lane. This was really kind of a concern for me because we talked about it in the preview. If there was a lane that was going to be a bit outclassed, it was probably going to be mid lane. Cream is certainly the player in this finals across both teams that I think has the most to prove. It's his first finals. Obviously, he's been stuck on OMG for his entire career, and so I imagine this is a pretty stressful moment, but he just wasn't good enough here in game number 1. I think if the Azir was a little bit more active in terms of some of the damage opportunities that he had in the late game, I think this could go a different way. Jackie Love is certainly playing on the edge of danger as he likes to do, and I think Tian generally was pretty good. Maybe 369 could have been better, especially considering I call him the best top laner in the world right now, and Tahm Kench really wasn't as relevant as we got closer to 35-40 minutes into the game, but I think Azir really needed to step up. If you're going to R1 that champion, if you're going to allow Knight to move around in the early game, you have to make it worth it in the team fights, and I just don't think he did enough enough of that. But like I said, Top Esports actually did have some fight in them this game. I think, you know, there are good moments to pull from this, especially considering Tian had a pretty good game here, I would say, all things considered, in game one. So losing it obviously sucks, but it sets up a situation where you just kind of have to keep your head on straight and you have to bounce back here in game number 2. If you lose the first 2 games, all of a sudden this series becomes a lot more difficult. Having to win 3 in a row against Bilibili is not an easy task. Nobody has done it this year, and Top Esports don't want to have to be the first ones in the finals. And so a big game 2, but if Bilibili can take this game number 2, if they can go up 2-0, that's going to be a pretty dominant start to this series, and it's going to fill them with a ridiculous amount of confidence and momentum. So are they going to be able to get that win, or is Top Esports going to be able to equalize this series? Well, the winner of game number 2 was Bilibili Gaming. They are going to take game number 2. They're going to go up in this series 2-0, and this was a slaughter. There really is nothing else for me to say when it comes to this game. Like, I'm going to try to make this 5 to 6 minutes, as I typically like to do, but this was not a close game. This was not back and forth. This was not a difficult one for BLG to win. They drafted a very aggressive comp. They drafted a lot of comfort and, you know, some non-comfort I will definitely add on to that, but a lot of things that this team just wanted to play, I think, in this particular instance, and they went out and slaughtered Top Esports. This is looking like the best team in the world in terms of what they put out so far in this series. Game 1 was a really nice, like, pseudo comeback from them. They lost a lot of pressure in game 1, but were able to get it back at the end, and then this one was just like full throttle from the beginning, even on a comp that generally would be considered scaling, like not one that you would necessarily consider like dominant in the early game. So credit to them for Top Esports. Yikes, man, like obviously, some of these players are going to be a bit nervous. Like, Cream has never been in the finals before. Everybody else on this team has a lot of finals experience. I think everybody, with the exception of Cream, has won an LPL title on the side of Top Esports, but man, they are not bringing their A game today. This was a bit of a concern. Bilibili is pretty clearly the most talented team in the LPL, and so when you see them matched up against a team like TES, you know, it was really intriguing because it was close the first time, but there was always going to be the possibility that this series was just going to devolve into BLG being incredibly dominant, and I think that is kind of a good example of what we got here in game number 2. So we'll talk about it. Player of the game is going to go to June in the jungle. Wukong has been something that's really fallen into the background, but I think it fills a very similar role to what it filled last year, like when it was a super high priority jungler and was picked in a lot of different games, especially going into something like Vi. He still is arguably one of the better team fighters coming out of that position in the game. I think things like Viego are obviously going to be a bit more consistent, and you get more out of Xin Zhao in the early game, but Wukong is still pretty good at setting up a lot of the rest of his team, and man, he still has a lot of pressure in the early game. It's not like he can't skirmish, it's not like he can't duel, he's just not going to be as strong as some of the more common picks in that role, and we saw that here. This was a dominant game from June, and honestly, he's been exceptional this year. I really do think that I have criminally underrated him. I didn't give him an all-pro nod because it was just like, well, I was talking about everybody else on this team so much more. Like, Elkanon were the best bot lane in the world, and Knight to me was the best player in the LPL. Bim continued to be really good, especially down the second half of the regular season. It felt like June kind of faded into the background of this team a lot, but he really is kind of the cog that makes everything move for this BLG team, and I don't think that was ever more apparent than it was in this game. He mega gapped Tian. Like, the canyon was ginormous in this game in the jungle. So credit to June. He was excellent. Elkanon continued to just be ridiculous. You know, Senna Ornn is something I've actually advised teams not to do. I don't think it's particularly strong. I think we've seen Senna in particular struggle in situations where she doesn't have the safety of something like a Tahm Kench. I love the idea of Senna Ornn, but it is more for the Ornn than it is for the Senna. And I think most of the time I don't love that, but man, when you just win anyways, when you play Senna Ornn and you win the 2v2, none of that matters. Like, that's not supposed to happen, but it happened anyways here. So credit to Elkanon. They just cannot be stopped. They are so dominant in terms of what they're able to put out in the 2v2. So much better than anybody else they played up against. Jackie Lowe and Mako are not pushovers. They have been excellent in the bot lane, but Elkanon have made everybody look silly this year. And then Bin was deathless on the top side, on Rek'Sai. I get that this champion can be a little annoying to face, but it does take some skill execution, and Bin is just outclassing 369 in this series. Knight wasn't as relevant in this game, but that's such a great thing to say. The MVP was the least relevant player on your team in a blowout win in the finals. That's what you want to see, especially because he is playing something like Azir that he's a little bit notorious for not being as good at. And so BLG is just cruising at the moment. It does not feel particularly close, and that's got to suck for top esports, but you're not out of it just yet. You're still in this series, even though game 2 definitely sucked. Tion, 369, Cream, all of them just got outclassed. I mean, Jackie Love and Mako also got outclassed. Their scorelines just theoretically look a little bit better, but this was not close at any time, and everybody lost. Like, everybody across the board lost. Dead of the game is going to go to Tion. It absolutely cannot go to anybody else. I've always disliked Vi. Not that I hate the champion in concept, I just don't think it actually does as much as everybody wants it to do. I've always thought it's overvalued. I think it's a good pick, but like, we saw the flaws of Vi in this game because once again, I will go back to this champion really is not good at a pro level when she has no gold. Like, when she has to play from a negative state, where she has to try to get her team back into the game, where she's not winning these early game skirmishes, like, she just shuts off. And I don't think that's as relevant for some of the other champions that you're going to get. And I don't think a lot of people give Vi that kind of credit. So, that's the performance that I think we got out of Tion, but it's really sad because he played so well on the Viego in game 1 to go to Vi here and to be kind of the reason your team loses is not ideal. But 369 also just got obliterated on the top side. His Renekton was not nearly as good as Bin on the other side of this in the 1v1. Both of these champions kind of known for their laning prowess, at least on the current patch. And, Bin definitely showing that he was a bit better in that matchup. Cream had nothing on the map. He looks really outclassed in this series, not even just by Knight, but he really isn't making a lot of positive plays for his team in any facet of the game. And Jackie Love and Mako, it's not like they didn't get destroyed in the bot lane. If you lose to Senna Ornn early, like, you're doomed. Like, there's nothing else to do in that particular instance. So really not a good game from Top Esports, and now it's do or die for them. If they lose this game 3, they get swept out of the finals. They still get to go to MSI, but certainly with less confidence than they would have had going into this series, and Bilibili wants to make that a reality. Can Top Esports keep this series alive for one more game, or is BLG going to show their dominance over the LPL? Well, the winner of game number 3 was Top Esports. They are going to take game number 3. They're going to keep this series alive at the very least for one more game, and obviously this was necessary for them. If they had lost this, they would have been eliminated from the playoffs, swept out of the finals, which would not be a particularly good fate. However, they are going to at the very least take game number 3, and man, did they do it by the skin of their teeth. They should have had full control of this game. They did a great job in the early game of actually being able to push some of their advantages and actually being able to put themselves in a relatively good position to end this game, with Bilibili going for some less comfortable picks on their side, some things that are definitely a little bit more out there in terms of what you could expect from their consistency in draft. But no, BLG is still really, really good, and specifically Elk is still really, really good. I know I've gotten some flack for calling him the best AD carry in the world right now, but these are the kinds of games that prove to me that he is kind of the best AD carry in the world right now. He almost 1v9 solo won this game for BLG. Credit, obviously, to June, who I think had a couple of good setups. Bin had a couple of good team fights, but this was Elk versus the world, and unfortunately, Elk came up just slightly short. But Top Esports is going to be walking away with a very narrow victory, and their lives still intact, at least for now. Player of the game here in game 3 is going to go to Mako in the support position. This Ashe was essential for marksman in this game in the bot lane, and that certainly makes things a little bit more volatile. You don't really have that reliability to sit back and wait on. You really kind of have to push your advantage early, especially because it's Draven and it's Kalista in these lanes. Both of these champions are kind of needing to be pushing the tempo. They need to get ahead. They need to really be more aggressive in the early game, and so you get these two bot lanes that have to go toe-to-toe. And luckily for Top Esports, Mako was the best player in the bot lane this game, and On really struggled to play that marksman on the other side of this matchup. Mako was excellent. The arrows in particular in the back half of this game were really big, but it was his laning phase that I think really separated him. We'll talk about Jackie Love. Had an okay game on the Draven. It's really weird to talk about Draven because every Draven game is entirely about Draven. There's really no other way to play that champion. You have to give him every resource. You have to give him everything because he's not really a champion without it, but when he does get it, he just wins the game automatically, and so it really just does become about whether or not you can get that Draven ahead, and it's not always the Draven's positioning or decision-making that ends up, doing that. It's really how the team plays around it, and so Jackie, I think, did a good job of following up on a lot of the things that Mako Mako and Tian and Cream ended up creating for him in the late game in particular, but I don't think he did anything exceptional in this game. Cream really was excellent to me. I thought this was easily the best game he's played in this series, which was necessary. Him not being very good in the first 2 games, I think was a big problem, like a really, really big problem. So getting back on Azir, getting back on something that he has played a bit of over the course of his career, even if it's not, the thing you would know him for, and actually doing really well on it into Knight's Asol, which I'm pretty sure he's never played before in his entire life, it's a good sign. 369, I think, also was a lot more relevant here on the Rek'Sai Tian and a couple of engages on the Rel. For the most part, this was a team effort, but I think Mako was really the one setting that up, and I think draft-wise, you were always going to be talking about this bot lane at least a little bit more when it came to what TES wanted to do. But for Bilibili on the other side, again, this is just not a particularly comfortable draft for them. You're talking Varus Kalista in the bot lane, which is this super high skill execution bot lane that really needs to play on the edge of danger, because Draven, you get 1 or 2 cash outs on Draven against these really squishy targets, and the game is just kind of over. I think Elk obviously was sensational in this game, truly one of the best AD carry performances he could have possibly put on in this particular instance. It just wasn't enough. On was terrible. He's going to get done of the game. I don't know if he's ever played Kalista before, but at least it didn't show in this game here. Mako was just way better than him on these marksmen, and it's funny because I don't think Mako's a particularly good Ashe player. I don't think it's something that has really separated him. He's not Ming or anything who just can't play that champion, but I typically have associated Mako on this team with being more of that roamer, somebody who wants to move around the map, and Ashe definitely a lot more focused on that 2v2, and so it was very strange to see Elk and On, who are really focused on the 2v2, really struggle in that aspect, but On just was not very good on the Kalista, and again, once you get behind on that champion, especially not getting, CS, not getting resources, not getting any gold, that becomes a pretty huge problem. Knight also just wasn't relevant at all in this game. I'm not sure if he's ever played Aurelion Sol before. I don't think he has professionally. Someone can probably fact check me on that, but if he has, it's not been a lot of games. It's certainly not something that I would expect to see Knight pull out. It's basically the opposite of what his style is, and he looked relatively uncomfortable even in some of the later fights on that champion. Xun and Bin were generally okay. I think they had some moments in the middle of this game around, 25 minutes where Elk was really starting to get himself back into it, where the Vi or the Rumble really set up something that made it more intriguing, but at the end of the day, they just didn't have enough firepower to overcome the deficit they themselves put them in with their own draft selections. And so BLG ends up falling here in game number 3. It's just game 3. You're not going to freak out now. If you lose game 4, all of a sudden you've got yourself a bit of a problem, because now you're going into a game number 5 having lost the last 2, having no momentum and no confidence going into that, and Top Esports has proven they can fight their way back in. So this is a pretty pivotal game number 4. If Top Esports can win this, obviously that's huge for them. It keeps their playoff hopes alive. It keeps their finals, their championship hopes alive. But Bilibili want to shut the door on that. They don't want to let this get out of hand too quickly. So which one of those is going to be the case? Well, the winner of game number 4 was Bilibili Gaming. They are going to take game number 4. They are going to win this series 3-1. And your 2024 Spring Split champions of the LPL for the first time ever are Bilibili Gaming. Congratulations to this team. Congratulations to these players. They have done it. They are champions here in the LPL. This organization that has put in attempt after attempt after attempt at a super team, at something that can compete near the top of the LPL standings, has finally struck gold. And with one major change in the offseason, bringing in the MVP in the mid lane in Knight, you have transformed a good team into the best team, maybe in the entire world. Truly exceptional stuff from Bilibili for Top Esports. You put up a fight. You at least tried in game number 3. Game 1 was relatively close, but you just aren't as good as Bilibili on the other side of this matchup. And so you're going to be looking at the play-in stage, but you're still going to MSI. Things aren't the worst that they could possibly be. But before we get into the grandiose talk of everything going on, let's talk about what happened here specifically in game 4 to close out this series. Player of the game and player of the series as a whole, in an absolute no-brainer, is going to go to Elk. He was dominant in the finals. I mean, truly exceptional. He's finals MVP, and it's not even remotely close. He was unbelievable. This conversation around who the best AD carry in the world is, I hear a lot of people throw out quite a few names. Ruler, Jackie Love, they deserve to be in there from the LPL. And, players like Viper and Gumayushi over in the LCK, they deserve to be in the conversation. But right now, if you're asking me to pick who the best AD carry in the world is, it's Elk. He has been that good for Bilibili, not only this year, but he was that good last year as well. He has followed up his big re-breakout, for those who hadn't been paying attention, by the way, as somebody who's been on his bandwagon, obviously in the WE days, but go back and watch my 2022 weekly reviews. I was talking about this guy every week for Ultra Prime as somebody who did not deserve to be on that garbage fire of a team. And now that he's got teammates around him, look what this guy can do. He can be the best AD carry in the world. He can win the finals MVP in the LPL. It truly is exceptional, and he was basically perfect in this series. You can't even really point out a ton of flaws in his game. Even in their one loss, he was the one that was actively trying his best to 1v9. There really isn't a lot else to say other than that Elk is unbelievable. Really, really, really good. I think at worst, he's top 3 in the world. Like, I don't even think you can really make the argument that he's anywhere but there right now. And it's not like On was bad in this series. He was really good here on Nico in game number 4. That champion just does a lot of really interesting things. I actually really like her in the support position because it does kind of increase her strengths while taking away some of her weaknesses. Sometimes in the mid lane, she can be relied upon a little bit too much to be a bit of a damage carry in some team fights because you're going up against things like Azir and Aurelion Sol at times, even something like Talia that can output a lot of damage in these fights, and Nico typically is going to have to match that when that's not really like what she does. She in the early game is a big lane bully, something that can, somebody that can really pressure out 1v1s in the mid lane or even in the bot lane. Like, she can do that out of the support position as well because her bases are really high. But as you scale further and further into the game, she just becomes a little bit more of a CC bot with that ultimate and something that can really cause a lot of chaos, and that can be a bit of a problem if you are relying on her to actively do a lot of damage in these fights. But in the support position, she just kind of gets to do all the things she's really good at, like pressure lane and start team fights, and not have to worry so much about being a primary responsibility in terms of damage dealing. So I really like Nico in the support position, and On played her excellently. June went deathless on Kindred. Not the easiest thing to do in the world, but June on Kindred is certainly the player and champion combination that you would expect to be able to do that. That's one of his signature picks, alongside the Nidalee that has always been there since the Invictus Gaming days. Really, really crazy to call him an LPL champion. Really happy for him. And then Knight and Bin. Knight was excellent here in Game 4. He's going to get a bit overlooked because he wasn't exactly the biggest highlight reel in this game, but truly his mechanics were sensational. Go back and watch like the little movements that he's making in a lot of these fights. Really good stuff. Bin was also very good this entire series on the top side. Bilibili was just better. There's nothing else to say. This is clearly the best team in China right now. This is clearly the best team in the LPL. And quite frankly, this is very likely the best team in the world. I'm not going to sit here and say that they are definitely that, but they have at least earned being in that conversation. And I think that there is a lot to like about this team moving into an international tournament. But for Top Esports on the other side, unfortunately, you just had to go up against Bilibili, who I do think really is that damn good. I know a lot of people are going to be a bit scared off by how this finals ended up going. I think a lot of people are going to look at Top Esports and maybe by de facto the rest of the LPL and say, oh, this region's really weak. Bilibili just coasted their way to a championship. It was never even close. But I think that's discrediting what Top Esports was able to do over the course of this year, not only in the regular season where they were very good, but the last time they played Bilibili in the winners finals when the series was really, really close. I get it. The finals are more important and you can maybe take a little bit more from a situation like that, but pretending like Bilibili just got to walk to a finals victory, I don't think is necessarily accurate towards what the playoffs actually were. And I think if you watched a lot of the playoffs, you'd probably agree with that. Unfortunately, it just didn't stand up here in the final series in the spring split. Dead of the game for Game 4 is going to go to Jackie Love. I think you could realistically give this to Tian as well, whoever you really wanted to give it to, but Jackie Love was just really not good on the Kalista. Again, when you're losing Prio in the early game to a Nico, that's a bit of a problem for Kalista because she doesn't really have any tools to get back into the game. I like this draft from a theoretical idea because if you are able to get that Kalista ahead, you have so many different tools to keep yourself ahead. And you've got Gragas engaged, you've got Vi engaged, you've got Talia, you've got Rakan. You have so many different tools to be able to activate it, but it all is kind of centered around getting that Kalista ahead in the early game, and it just didn't end up working out for them. Tian was a bit to blame for that as well. June was just way better here getting the counter pick with the Kindred. The Vi really not working out at all in this series, basically in any of the games. Does go back a bit to what I've been talking about over the past couple of months, basically the past year at this point, about how Vi is overvalued by most teams in the world, in my opinion, right now. But 369 also was just strictly worse than Bin on the top side of the map throughout this entire series. Cream had that very good Game 3 where I think he really kept his team alive, but was not good at all outside of Game 3. And Mako was just kind of along for the ride. Jackie Love doing a lot of BMing throughout the series and ends up not being good enough in game number 4. There are real concerns with this team, but how much do you want to chalk that up to them not being good enough? How much do you want to chalk that up to Bilibili being as good as they are. It's a difficult line to walk because you really don't know where to draw it, but wherever you want to draw it, I think is generally accurate. I've seen both sides be taken. I've seen the LPL is just really strong and Bilibili's the best team in the world, and so Top Esports shouldn't feel bad losing to them. And I've also seen Bilibili so much better than everybody in the LPL, and, you know, nobody other than them is going to make an impact internationally. I've seen both. You know, obviously I'm somewhere in the middle of these conversations, but Top Esports is a good team. At the very least, they are a very good team. You don't get past JD Gaming in the playoffs twice if you're not a very good team, and that was just the case. And so even though they're going to be disappointed with how this result ends up working out, hopefully they can rebound and get themselves back up for MSI. And then for Bilibili, like I said, congratulations to them. They did everything right here today. They were the better team by a large margin, and they deserve their first LPL trophy. I'm sure this feels really nice for these players because a lot of them have been playing together for over a year at this point. Knight, obviously, the new addition, but everybody on this team has earned their spot in terms of the upper echelons of the world rankings at this point. All right, but that is going to do it for my LPL Finals overview and analysis video here in the Spring Split. And that's going to do it for the Spring Split here in the LPL. That's all 4 major regions wrapped up, done, dusted. We've covered all of them on this channel. Every regular season game, every playoff game, every finals, everything for the LCS, the LEC, the LCK, the LPL. It's all done, and we are now heading right into MSI. The draw was right after this. It's a really intriguing one. I'm sure I'll have some time to go over it as we continue to go along, you know, previewing MSI. I'm really excited to be doing that. We're going to be having a meta report video coming out basically tomorrow, I think a couple of hours after this video is coming out, that's going to be talking about what I expect to see at the tournament in terms of the champions. We are going to be having, of course, a full power rankings and preview video that goes over every single team, including the minor region teams that I've spent basically the last week watching the playoffs of. Obviously, I'm not going to be as familiar with them just because I've watched every single game that every other major region team has played this year, but, you know, watching 20 or so games, I think gives you a pretty good idea of where these teams are sitting. But I would love to know what other content you guys are interested in down in the comment section below. Let me know if you're excited for MSI. Let me know if you're excited for Bilibili and Top Esports and whether or not you think they're going to do well at MSI. Would love to know your thoughts and opinions down below. Of course, if you enjoyed the video, leave a like. It really does mean a lot to me. Lets me know you guys are enjoying the content, and it does help get this video out to a lot more people, which I'm always very appreciative of. If you're new here, hit the subscribe button. MSI is just around the corner. Like I said, we've got a lot of cool videos coming up, and then of course we're going to be covering the MSI or the mid-season invitational every single day that it happens on this channel, basically daily. And so if you're interested in that kind of coverage, hit the subscribe button, hit that bell so you can be notified when those videos do go live. But of course, with all that being said, I hope you all are having a great day. I hope you continue to have a great day, and I will see you all later.